Hi everyone, this is Jenny Parks. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. It is Tuesday, March 26, 2019, 1 o'clock Central Time, and you have tuned into Calculating Cost Savings Associated with OER Implementation. Just as a reminder, please, if you have questions, use the chat box. Those of us here on the presenter end of things will be trying to answer those as we are able. And as another reminder, we will be recording and captioning this webinar, and give us a day or two to post it, please. All right, here we go. Like I said, this is Calculating Cost Savings Associated with OER Implementation. Today's agenda will be pretty straightforward. I'm going to introduce all of our speakers and thank them once again for contributing to this effort. Then I'm going to just introduce conceptually what we're trying to do here with the webinar. And then we are going to have 4 different folks who have engaged in some very impressive cost savings calculations present a thumbnail sketch of what they've done, just to acquaint each of you with the options that are out there. And then we will open it up for questions. And again, those will come through the chat box. So first of all, that's me, your host. I'm the Director of Academic Leadership Initiatives at the Midwestern Higher Education Compact. After me, you'll hear from Nicole Finkbeiner, Director of Institutional Relations at OpenStax. Then you'll hear from David Wiley, Chief Academic Officer of Lumen Learning. Then Amy Hofer, the Coordinator of the statewide Open Education Library Service at OpenOregon. And then finally from Craig Hashbarger, Audit Manager for the North Dakota State Auditor's Office. And joining us and answering questions as needed is our OER state policy expert and commentator, Tanya Spilovoy, the Director of Open Policy at WCET. All right, let's go. The reason that I went ahead and decided that this would be the topic of my first OER webinar, and I'll remind you all that we'll have another one in May, so look out for information about that, is that the issue of cost calculations is really one of the most common ones that I receive in the work I do with our 12 state OER action teams about out there, because for a number of reasons. In order to make the case to legislators or to administrators, there has to be some type of accountability there. Folks want to know what's the return on investment for taking this on. So it's very important to be able to document something that shows some cost savings. There's also a lot of other research out there that we can do at the same time, and that might be the subject of another webinar in the future, because definitely you can track student outcomes in an OER course versus one that does not have open educational resources available. But for this webinar, we're just going to talk about the types of savings that are attributable to OER implementation. And one of the issues, though, even though we need this data, we need these figures, these calculations, as you all probably know, there is no recommended or preferred methodology out there. In fact, when you start looking at it, literally everyone does it differently. There are a few places where they, like at SPARC, where they've begun to have a few types of recommendations for some conventions, but as of yet, there's nothing that dominates the field. A lot of the studies are based on varying assumptions and are conducted at varying units of analysis. And we definitely tried to capture a wide range of those here in the presentations today. So for the purposes, for this webinar, our purpose is to give you examples of high quality studies, and so that you can see different strategies, different assumptions, different levels of analyses, and to provide you the opportunity to talk to the folks who have conducted those studies. As I said, we've got our 4 experts here, our 4 PIs for these studies. They're the same ones I mentioned before. And so now we will start. I'm going to turn it over to Nicole Finkbeiner of OpenStax.
Hello and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Nicole Finkbeiner, and I'm the Director of Institutional Relations here at Rice University, working on the OpenStax OER project. And what that means is that I spend the vast majority of my time coaching colleges and universities on how to effectively encourage the use of OER on their campuses. So I do this primarily through an OpenStax institutional partner program that we run each year, where we take somewhere between 9 to 12 colleges a year and coach them through the process of effectively encouraging OER adoptions. And the schools that go through that program typically see about 150, well actually not about, an average of 158% increase in OER adoptions in a year. So in a little bit I'll put my email in the chat if you are interested in that. So I've tried to bring in not only Rice University's perspective running the OpenStax OER project, but also that perspective of the institutional partner program and the questions that I get and the struggles that we have with doing that. And so one of the big questions that was in our institutional partner program listserv the other day was the general tracking of adoptions. And I thought this was a good place to frame our conversation today. And so how do we track the OpenStax adoptions? You'll probably hear us say a lot, well, we have 2.5 million students a year using our books each year. How are we getting to those numbers? And we're getting to those numbers primarily by faculty and institutions self-reporting their adoptions. So it's as simple as Mary Smith saying, my name is Mary Smith, I teach psychology at Kellogg Community College, and I have 300 students a year. And that's how we're getting to those adoption numbers. So how do they do this self-reporting of adoptions? Well, the primary way that they do this is through the faculty verification process we have to receive the faculty-only ancillaries. The majority of our book all of our books come with PowerPoint slides, and some of them also come with things like instructor solution manuals and test banks and things like that. Obviously, we don't want those to get in the hands of students. So we do require faculty to prove that they are a faculty member, and yes, we manually check you if we don't know you already, and prove that you're a faculty member before gaining access to those resources. And so during that process, we ask, what subjects do you teach? Are you using the books that OpenStax offers? Which ones, and how many students are impacted by that? So I would say that's the vast majority of ways that we do that. We also have an adoption form on our website that a lot of faculty use, where they'll say, it just says, are you using our books? Please let us know. And that really helps us with our grant reporting back to our grant funders. We are a sustainable nonprofit, but we do use grant funding to develop new textbooks, and of course our grant funders are very curious about that. And then through our institutional partner program and other ways, institutions also report their adoption at the institutional level. So then we take all of that, and I know the next question I get quite often is, what database do you use? Most institutions I work with use a simple Excel document to do that, and I think that works probably okay at the institutional level. For us, we decided to use a full-blown consumer relationship management tool. So it's a massive database that not only stores the information that we need, but all of our contacts with people, all of our communications through our support team, all of the emails back and forth with me, anything like that is all stored in one place. We use Salesforce, quite frankly, because they gave us a nonprofit educational discounted license. So that's why we use that. I would say that that tool is really robust and sometimes creates a beast of its own, but that's what we use. And then we use that tool to calculate the total number of students impacted in cost savings. It's a dashboard I have, and I can just click and run a report and tell you exactly how many students are using a particular book and the cost savings from there. So the next thing that we had to decide was how to track cost savings for the OpenStax books that we publish. And our biggest concern, I started at OpenStax about 5 years ago, and at the time we had about, I think, around 400 adoptions of our books, so a really small amount at that point. But we were working towards scale. We wanted to get, so there were a lot of faculty and students impacted by our books. So whenever we're setting something up like this, our first question is, how is this scalable? And so one of the things that we decided to do, first decision on this particular subject, was to track the average cost savings across all books. And so what I mean by that is, we say that a faculty member who has adopted our anatomy and physiology book and a faculty member who has adopted our sociology book they are saving their students an average the same amount of money. And we found that by doing that, we were able to quickly scale this. And again, it wasn't a really big deal when we had 100 faculty using our books. But now that we're up to over 20,000 faculty using our books each semester, that becomes a lot trickier to do in any sort of database and things. So I know a lot of people try to track it by individual book and say what was the cost of the book before and what is the cost of the OER and all of that. Our OER are free, so that was one factor we didn't have to worry about unless the students opt to buy a print copy, which they're welcome to do. But we decided that that average savings number and using the same saving number no matter which book they used was going to be the easiest way for us to scale that. And so our original average savings number that we used up until this academic year was $98.57. And that was just based on some internal calculations. We have a couple people on our team who are previous publisher representatives, so they were able to take their industry experience and really work through that, look at rentals, used books, things like that. One of the key decisions we made early on is that we did not want to just use the new book price that I know some people do calculate that way. We opted not to do that, and the reason we opted not to do that is most students, of course, do not pay that list price, or hopefully they don't anyway. So we wanted an aggregate that came out at this level. We also checked this with a lot of, and I know Amy Hofer is speaking later, and she's done a lot of research on where the different average calculations came from and such. And we also wanted to make sure that we were in line with those. So most of the calculations were coming out around $100, which also gave us confidence that this was a good number. With that said, one of the things that Rice is a research university, and so one of the things that we are starting to look at and have started to look at moving forward is how do we conduct empirical academic-based research that spans multiple departments at Rice and also spans multiple research universities and community colleges and things like that. And so having our own unique number was a little bit of a challenge in that people would say, especially in an institutional partner program, they would say, well, if you use OpenStax's calculation, it's this, and if you use this calculation, it's this, and things like that. And so we saw a lot of that going back and forth. And I see Sarah's question, was it $98.57 per student per course? Yes, it was per student per course. So one of the things that we started to run into as we started to merge this research at OpenStax with other academic research departments at Rice and things like that is that we quickly learned that in coming up with our own internal numbers and our own internal ways of doing things may not be the best way if we wanted to be able to collaborate with different colleges and universities and things like that. So a good other example of this is we had set up our Salesforce database to show us to just be by the school name. And now what we're realizing is a lot of the research that we want to do and a lot of the research partnerships we want to do is more around the IPEDS number. And so we're going back and trying to make it so that we align with those IPEDS numbers. So hopefully that makes sense. But the point is we decided that one of the big things that we wanted to do was find a number that we knew people used quite often for research and things like this and mirror that number so that we wouldn't have these unique numbers sitting out there, and it was something that could be used across various universities and community colleges. And so we find that the U.S. Department of Education's National Center for Education Statistics is a big number that a lot of institutions, a lot of industry uses to determine the amount that students spend on required course materials. So what we decided to do was move to using that number so that we are better in alignment with other research that was being done around those same statistics and such. So in May 2018, they said that the average student savings was, or the average undergraduate student spent $555 on required course materials for the academic year. And so what we did from there was we took that and divided that by the 7 undergraduate average courses per year, which is the average load. And that's how we got to our new number, that's 7937. So when we report any adoptions from the academic years before 2018-2019, we're still using that 9857 number. But now that we're starting to see textbook prices come down, which was also something that was reported in here, we did want to adjust our number now to meet that new number, but we also wanted it to align with a number that was used more commonly. So from 2018 to 2019 forward, we're using that 7937 as our average cost savings. And with that, I will turn it over to David.
Thanks, Nicole. This is David Wiley, and I've been involved in this trying to figure out how to estimate cost savings work for a while, have published some papers with different methodologies on this in the past, but always looking to be more accurate and provide data that people feel more comfortable using. And so recently with my colleagues Mo and Nicole at SPARC, did a new study trying to develop a new method here for estimating cost savings. And the links on this slide here, and you'll have access to these later. The first link there on SPARC's website really provides more of a narrative around the methodology for how we collected data. And then the second link there, which goes to my blog, posts the exploratory data analysis and provides a link to the raw data as well as to the source code that was used for the analysis. So in terms of methodology, and speaking to Nicole's point about using the NCES data, and maybe this is something that we'll talk about later on. Totally understand why people choose to use the NCES data, but I have to admit that I'm not a fan of it when it comes to NCES's calculation what students spend on textbooks. It does show that they're spending less on textbooks every year, but I don't know that that's a great thing. I think students are also spending less on food and they're spending less on housing every year. And I don't think that's because food and housing are getting cheaper. I think they're eating less and they're experiencing more homelessness. And I think part of the reason students are spending less on materials every year is that they're just foregoing purchasing more of them each year. And so while it's true that the amount that they spend is going down, the amount that they need to spend in order to have access to all their materials is a number that I think is that we don't talk about as much as we should. The NCES number is what they actually spend. And again, I get why you'd want to calculate savings from what students actually spend. But I want to make an argument for a minute that we might calculate savings from what we ask them to spend as opposed to what they save by not purchasing and foregoing access to materials that they need for classes. So rather than using the NCES number, we went out and took a random stratified sample. So we looked at all the institutions and IPEDs that are Title IV eligible, either public or private for-profit, and then divided them up, and I'll show you a graphic in a moment that explains this a little better, and selected a representative number of institutions from each category. We then selected 20 high-enrolling courses for which we know easily adoptable OER options exist, and in many cases those are options that are available from OpenStax as well as from Lumen and others. And then for each of those 120 institutions that we drew, and for each of those 20 high-enrolling courses with easily adoptable OER available, we randomly assigned 5 of those courses to each institution, so 5 times 120 gives us 600 data points altogether. And then went through manually to each college bookstore website and recorded each price for every available option, whether that's new print, used print, print rental, digital rental, loose leaf, every single option that was available in a bookstore, we recorded a price for that. And then for courses with no materials listed, we recorded zeros for those prices. Now, when you want to estimate how this works, students do engage in lots of different behaviors, right? Some of them don't purchase at all, some of them don't know any better, and so they buy new and pay full sticker price, some of them rent, some of them share. There's a wide range of behaviors, and we know that that's true. But honestly, there aren't data about those student behaviors that we felt like were trustworthy enough that we could take them and really build a strong argument around using them. And so what we did was, rather than try to decide what percentage buy, what percentage skip, what percentage rent, and then multiplying those across all the cost categories that we had collected data for, we said, for each of these, each material, each kind of textbook or whatever it might be, let's take the highest price that was listed at the bookstore and the absolute lowest price that was available there, and then take the midpoint between that high and low price. And that's the price figure that we're going to use. That's the cost figure. We acknowledge that many students spend money on OER. Some students buy printed copies. Some students go to FedEx and print copies themselves. We're also acknowledging that OER is sometimes adopted in conjunction with homework and other tools. And so you'll see on the slides coming up here 3 kind of categories. One, OER only, which is OER without some kind of homework or other online system associated with it. OER hybrid, which is OER plus some kind of homework system or other tool. And then TCM is just traditionally copyrighted materials, those being the opposite of OER. So, here are the types of institutions represented in the data. They're in terms of simplified Carnegie classifications. You can see associates and masters granting institutions making up the bulk of the data. One of the interesting things that we realized as we were collecting this pricing data was it was also giving us a good empirical view into the rate of adoption of OER materials in courses where we knew OER options were available. And so a little over, somehow when the slides got converted from PowerPoint to PDF, the numbers didn't come through, so I apologize. But about 93% of all the adoptions in these courses where we know good OER are available are still traditionally copyrighted materials. And a little over 4% are OER only, and a little over 1% are OER hybrid. So that was one of the kind of unintended consequences of this study, was it gave us a nice empirical view over a stratified random sample of institutions as to what the OER adoption rates nationwide look like. Here is the average of the highest and lowest prices by course. So for each individual course, like writing at the top here, we looked at writing across a number of institutions. And so the triangle there is showing you the average lowest price for the required materials for that course across all institutions that we looked at. And the plus is showing you the highest average price across all of those. This is the average highest and average lowest prices by type. So on the right here, you can see TCM, the average highest price is about $164, and the average lowest price that these materials were available through the bookstore for being about $103. The center column here is OER only, where there's no associated homework or practice platform, where the highest average price was a little over $15, and the lowest average price was about $6. And then OER hybrid on the far left is showing you, again, OER that are assigned in conjunction with some kind of homework platform, where the highest average price was about $40 and the lowest average price was about $29. So just collapsing those together to say, what are the overall average prices by type of required materials? Again, on the far right for TCM, it's about $134 is the midpoint price between the highest price for which those are available and the lowest price for which they're available. The second column from the right, OER only, the average price there is about $11. For OER hybrid, it's about $35. And then if you collapse OER hybrid and OER only together to look at all OER, whether or not it's assigned in conjunction with a homework or practice platform of some kind, the average price is $17. So then if you take the TCM price on the right and subtract OER all, OER hybrid, or OER only, then that gives you the average amount of student savings by type. So on the left here, OER all, whether or not there's some kind of additional homework or practice platform associated. The average savings for OER would be about $117. For OER hybrid, it's about $100, and for OER only, it's about $123. And that's everything that I prepared to share, and I will hand you over to Amy and look forward to questions later.
Hi, this is Amy Hofer. I was just typing a question for David. So I just want to say thank you for inviting me. I'm really getting a lot out of this webinar myself. OpenOregon Educational Resources is a program for all 24 of Oregon's public higher ed institutions, so 17 community colleges and 7 universities. And we are not in a system. So it's kind of a point about our culture in Oregon that each institution pretty much does things their own way. And I also have up OpenOregon.org. That's the website where you can see, what's going on. I've published research there. The resources page shows known adoptions and what's being used. And there's also a tab with a contact form. And if you fill out that form, I will receive your email. So if you want to keep chatting after this, feel free to get in touch with me. So just to kind of back up for a second, the MHEC folks said that there's been a lot of interest in the idea of tracking savings data, and I find that it's really important for me to do that too, because it's really the most powerful argument for me to give when I am seeking future funding. So whether that's with the legislature or the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, it's been pretty interesting to realize that, as educators, we know that the student savings numbers are not the be-all and end-all, but that is really the most powerful way that we can talk about the impact of open ed in that elevator pitch kind of way, where you don't have time to explain what a Creative Commons license is and why this is so important for innovative pedagogy, right? We can just talk about savings data and get our point across pretty easily when we're advocating for funding. So let's see here, there we go. I asked folks in Oregon who have already been collecting savings data if they could, get together with me and create some best practices. And nobody would admit to having best practices. People would only admit to having practices. And I think that really reflects what we've already heard from both Nicole and David, which is that there really is a variety of methods, and it depends on what you are trying to do, what your objective is, what decisions you're going to make. So while there aren't best practices on student savings data, in terms of methodology, I do think that there are best practices in terms of handling data in general. So please keep in mind that data is squishy. You can slice and dice it to say a lot of different things. So it's very important to be transparent and consistent when you're reporting savings, right? And that transparency piece is what you've heard both Nicole and David do, which is to say, this is our methodology. This is why we made the choices that we made. And in order to compare apples to apples, we're going to make those same set of choices year over year in order to be consistent. Another thing to keep in mind is that data really isn't a one-person kind of endeavor, and it's really important to build good relationships with the people that manage data sources. So often there will be an institutional research department on your campus. Those are really good people to bring cookies to or take out to coffee because they're going to have access to the student information system, and they're going to know how to formulate a question to that system that will give you data that's useful to you. And of course, there are lots of other kinds of data sources on your campus. For example, the learning management system is another really important data source. The Bookstore data on faculty adoptions is another important one, and so on. And then the third thing that I think is really important is to just keep in mind that saving money has a really big impact on students. So regardless of the method that you're using to calculate the amount, the focus should really be on the impact to students. You don't want to get into the weeds with somebody and start quibbling about, like, should you use $78, $50, or $79 as your multiplier, right? Like, if you're having that conversation, you're pretty much on the wrong track with that person, right? Because we know that when we're talking about the cost of attendance in higher ed, every dollar counts. And that's where we should be, finding a way to communicate in a way that really keeps that emphasis. So in terms of calculating savings and the data that you'll need, there is a seemingly simple formula, right? Like, how many students saved the money, how much money did they save, multiply those things together, and then there's your savings estimate. And there is so much work packed into this seemingly simple formula because of the kinds of decisions that you make when you think about which students are we going to count, right? Like, which courses are we going to count? So just to break that down a little bit, do you want to use courses that have been designated in your schedule as being no-cost or low-cost courses? Do you want to count only courses that use OER, right, like specifically courses where the materials have an open license on them? Do you want to maintain your own list of courses with known savings? Do you want to track alongside the Bookstore where there's no assigned materials, right? Like, this is a decision that is going to impact how many students you count. And then in terms of the amount of money saved, you just heard two different valid methods for calculating that, and the North Dakota folks that we're going to hear from did a really wonderful job of showing a different method of coming up with a different amount of money saved. In Oregon, some of the longer-running textbook affordability programs in the colleges have tended to track the retail cost of the last known commercial adoption, and they'll use that as a multiplier for that course. So, if somebody previously assigned a $250 textbook and now they use OER, those students are tracked as saving $250 going forward. Obviously, there's a lot of work involved in figuring out those historic textbook costs as opposed to deciding on one multiplier. And I think that folks that use that kind of data have also started to find that as they go forward in time, that last known commercial adoption price starts to make a little bit less sense because it starts to recede further into the past and be less relevant to the impact on students now. But it is still a valid way of tracking savings as long as you're being clear about, what number did you decide to use and why did you make that decision. I wanted to share some additional resources because we are scratching the surface here. There is a blog post under further reading and listening, the first link there, estimating student savings from no-cost and low-cost course materials. That post has the templates that I've listed on the left-hand side of this slide. So feel free to make a copy and start messing around with those spreadsheets. They have formulas in them. Let me know if something works really well or works really poorly. I would be curious to hear. The second link there is an archived webinar about this topic, but just sort of expanded out to a full hour. And then the third link is estimated 2017-18 student savings in no-cost, low-cost courses. So it's 1 year's worth of data. I had 9 participating institutions, and each one used and reported a different method of calculating student savings represented by the no-cost and low-cost schedule designation. So if you want 9 different ideas about how you could calculate savings, that's a great place to look. I was really interested recently to see a link to a book that is under open peer review right now. It's an openly licensed book called Data Feminism, I believe. And they're doing their peer review process in the open with a comment feature on each chapter. And one of the things that they said is they have a theoretical framework to support the idea that very local data and data that is reported in different ways that makes a lot of sense in the local environment, the relevance of that. So I feel like that concept is relevant to the idea of having 9 institutions with their own methodology feeding into an aggregate statewide estimate, right? It's always going to be an estimate. We're never really making a claim that this many students really saved this many dollars and cents. We're representing the impact with an estimate. So I think I will leave it at that, and feel free to get in touch. And I see that there have been questions in the chat, and I'll try to get to them now.
Well, this is Craig Hashbarger. I'm an audit manager with the North Dakota Office of the State Auditor. I head up a performance audit division that looks specifically at the North Dakota University system. So what we do is, as per our mission statement, is our mission statement is to produce informative audits to improve government. So that was the angle that we were taking, the approach that we were taking in developing our methodology when we wanted to look at open educational resources and the savings that occurred for students across the state of North Dakota. And one thing that I think made this process unique for us is because we were speaking to a very, very broad audience of within the North Dakota University system as well as outside the North Dakota University system, as well as decision makers such as legislators. We needed to try to really be clear in terms of our approach and also our auditing standards. Because it was framed as an audit, we were required to not necessarily have the right answer, because as has been noted, there's many wonderful answers to how to calculate the cost savings, but we needed to be able to calculate it and also communicate to the readers of our reports how we came up with our numbers. So that was really the approach that we took in developing this OER audit. We had noted that OER was part of the North Dakota University System Strategic Plan. That goes back to Dr. Tanya Spilvoy, whom you'll be hearing. She was one of the main leaders of this initiative in North Dakota, and some legislative dollars were allocated to encourage implementation of OER in North Dakota. And so we were, as auditors, what we were looking at is what was the impact of that OER effort. So to get there, we began by calculating the dollars per student, and we started by, we thought one approach that made sense to us is we looked at spring of 2018, and we looked at 31 credits worth of general education courses, because we noted that in most cases the general ed courses were the ones that were most conducive to OER or had the highest application or adoption of OER. So we took 31 gen ed courses that would be taken by a typical freshman/sophomore, and we looked at all 11 North Dakota University System institutions. Those are the ones along the bottom of that graph. And we looked at what was the new textbook price for those 31 general education courses at each institution. So that was the orange bar, which is the highest cost amount. And then we also looked at what were the different non-new textbook prices, such as used, hard copies, rental, hard copies or digital. And we did look at third parties like Amazon, but we ended up not using that just because of the limited availability of number of copies, as well. That's an unknown, as well as I'd heard and from many sources the lack of reliability of those materials. non-conforming materials being delivered to students. So basically we took the highest to lowest cost that a student could pay in purchasing those materials from a bookstore, from the university bookstore, and broke them down in the chart, as you can see. And then we used the median high and the median low. So it's kind of hard to see in the graph that I provide, but the median high dollar value was $1,660, and that would be for 31 credits. And the median low number was $734, which would have been Minot State University. So the high averages out, if you divide that per credit, it's about $160 per credit, and the low amount is about $71 per credit. So that $71 figure is pretty close to what OpenStax had come up with. I think theirs is around $79. Then once we'd calculated that cost per credit, then we had to identify the number of credit hours, or the number of students impacted and the number of credit hours impacted. So here we had the institutions self-report to us, and we had the vice president or provost, vice president of academic affairs or provost from each institution provide us a report of the courses during this period, fall 2014 through fall 2017. As you can see, the dollars that were allocated to the OER initiative occurred in between spring of 2015 and fall of 2015. So you could see the trends in terms of the number of courses impacted, the number of students impacted. That was reported to us by each institution, and we did go in and audit those numbers because we were doing an audit. So we looked at those, and we actually obtained course syllabi and other evidence to support whether that truly was an OER course, and if it didn't meet the definition of OER, or if they had some OER materials, but they also had to purchase a traditional textbook of some sort, then we threw it out. So we were very much erring on the side of being conservative in our presentation and avoiding overstating the number of students and courses impacted. So once we had that number, so these numbers are the audited numbers, and then once we had that, then it was simple. But we went to the enrollment figures in the North Dakota University Systems accounting system and multiplied it out. We took both that high dollar number per credit, so that $100-something number, and also the lower $71 number times the number of credits, and then we came up with our estimated savings, and we did the range. We gave both the low range and the high range. So the low range was approximately $1.1 million over this period that we were reviewing, fall 2014 through fall 2017, and on the high end it was about $2.4 million. So we, rather than pinpointing an average and just giving that number, we thought we'd let the readers have that range. We didn't factor in for things like students not purchasing books or sharing books or pirating copies of books, and we knew that happened too. But we just didn't factor for that because it just was not cost effective from our perspective to attempt to quantify that. And then beyond that, then basically we just took the information, we presented that, and part of the idea was to identify, well, there was $100,000 spent for this Open Educational Resources Initiative. Was it beneficial? And based on all the other testing we did surrounding the cost factors, was it worthwhile? And we've found certainly on balance it was a positive thing for the students of North Dakota. And so then we went beyond that too and looked at the other positive and negative factors of OER, the good and the bad. We also looked at what were some of the barriers that presented broader implementation of OER and how could those be overcome. And we borrowed from OpenOregon, has a great database of information for that facilitates sharing of textbooks among the Oregon system, and so we pointed to that as an example of some of the opportunities out there to help expand and facilitate broader use of OER. So, and the report was very well received by a number of different constituents across state, both within the legislature, within the university system, and just in the public as a whole. So I think that's, and this report, this is a public document. It's available on the State Auditor's Office website, so if you wanted to see more and get into more of the details about how we calculated everything, and then what we did with our other objectives of that audit, it's publicly available for anybody to see, so you're welcome to it. Then I'm going to go ahead and see if there's any questions I need to answer, but I think my time's about up. I think we're supposed to go to 1:45, so I'll hand over the phone. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig. This is Jenny Parks again. I wanted to thank all of the presenters. There are questions that came up during various parts of the presentation, so I am going to get started asking some of those and trying to match those with the presenter to whom those questions were posed. The presenters are being pretty good about answering those, but I think a lot of these questions are ones that a broader range of our participants today would like to hear about. So I'm going to go first to the ones that have already been answered. And so we've got one that was asked of Nicole, and it said, was the 98.57 per student per semester or per course? And I'm going to let Nicole just come on and verbally tell us the answer to that question.
That was a per student per semester per course. So it was per student per semester per. So and that helps also, I think, with the accuracy of it. So for example, we have university physics, which is a 3-semester course, and we've actually split the book into volume 1, volume 2, and volume 3 for that reason. And so if a student takes all 3 semesters of that, then we would calculate they would save that 98.57 or now 79.37 for each semester. And that really fits with what we see in the traditional textbook industry, that if it is a thicker book or a multi-semester course book or a multi-semester book, then it would be a higher cost. So we still believe that that is in alignment with that.
Thanks, Nicole. I'm going to let David answer the same question because he had answered it previously, but I'll let you speak to that as well, David.
Yeah, the numbers that I presented about were per student per course.
Thank you. Okay. Another question, and I do believe I think this one came up while David was presenting. Part of what you were talking about, David, was where you were looking at courses for which you knew there were good OER materials available. How did you define good?
Well, in that case, we meant materials that would be easy to adopt, so something that had been packaged either to look like a textbook or as a complete piece of courseware, and that had a minimal amount of kind of ancillaries available for it as well. So not saying, oh, I know there are 10,000 little pieces of OER around the internet for this course, so we'll choose this course, but something where a faculty member could make an adoption decision that looks like a traditional textbook adoption decision and just switch over to OER rather than needing to go through a huge discovery, aggregation, curation process.
Thank you. And I think that's an important distinction to make because you begin to get into the use of faculty time and all of that, which then if you're going to even try to deal with that, you got a whole other set of calculations. We have another question, I think, which was for you, David. Where do the costs for OER-only courses come from?
Yeah, so the Bookstore data on that, the costs are in the same categories as they are for TCM. In the case of an OpenStax book, for example, there's new print available, there's used print probably available, there might be print rental available. So they're the same sort of categories. But in an OER only, there will also be free digital available.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question for all the presenters. What is the longest term study on cost savings and student outcomes? Well, I guess we can go or student outcomes you're aware of. What, I guess, covers the greatest span of time? Are these always semester, academic years, et cetera? You don't know what you might be aware of there. Tanya, you might have some insight for us here too.
I'll start. If you read the essay on SPARC's website about the work that I was presenting on, that work was done in response to a challenge that was made at the annual Open Education Conference 5 years ago about whether or not we could collectively save students $1 billion with OER. And so as you dig through that post a little bit, but in other pieces that are already out or are coming from SPARC, and I could double check on that and get back to folks on the list. I know that SPARC has been collecting usage or adoption data over that period as well, and so I think their intent is to take 5 years worth of adoption data, multiply it times this cost savings number, and answer the question whether or not we've saved students $1 billion. And they indicated in a presentation at OpenEd 18 that the kind of initial results were that yes, collectively students have saved $1 billion because of OER. And so that's a 5-year study, and that's the longest one that I'm aware of. It might be a stretch to call it a study. You'd want to look at their methodology for kind of deciding what constituted an OER adoption and how many students had benefited. But in terms of long-term, that's the longest one I know of.
Thank you. Did anyone else are you aware of any other larger studies of that nature?
This is Amy.
And, go ahead.
Sorry. I saw in the, I don't know if folks are seeing the chat that I posted. I think it was to everybody. The Open Ed group maintains a great, really helpful website where they have a summary of all published OER research to date on perceptions and efficacy. I can see that Jen is asking what about student outcomes, and you can find student outcome research there. One of Nicole's colleagues at OpenStax just published a really interesting article about whether we're designing studies that will tell us about student outcomes in the way that we want to be able to answer those questions when it comes to use of OER. And one of the most interesting findings of that study, I have to say, is that there isn't really good research to show the efficacy of any textbooks, whether they're commercial or openly licensed, which to me makes me wonder all the more why students have to pay so much if it's an unproven way to share educational materials through a textbook in general. But anyway, that gets us really off the topic of this webinar. But just to say that there is a lot of great research, and the Open Ed group is usually the first place that I look. So I wanted to share that.
Thanks, Amy.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Amy. This is Jenny. Go ahead.
Oh, this is Nicole. Yeah, so to expand on that a little bit, so Rice University, for the OpenStax books, we've been collecting adoption data since 2011, which is, we've been working in open educational resources since 1999, but really started doing the OpenStax projects and collecting adoption data from our end since 2011. So we've got that for about 8 years now. On the efficacy side, we just published at Rice University a study about the impact of resources on improving student learning. And as Amy mentioned, number one, there's not great research to show that any textbook impacts student learning. But we actually ran algorithms and such about the student sample sizes and most of the OER efficacy research that's been done thus far, and have shown through those analyses that we probably shouldn't have seen any impact because the sample sizes thus far have been so small. So if you all are interested in that, we are running a free webinar with Dr. Grimaldi, who was our lead on that study, in a couple weeks, and I think it's April 8th. And so if you're interested in that, you can see that as well.
That is great. Thank you, Nicole. I think that's going to be really important. So we have a question about, it says, why do the different methods use an average or a median value based on bookstore prices? Is it not possible to ask the bookstore to provide detailed data about how many learning materials were sold at each price and therefore do a weighted average? How would that allow you to get closer to the true cost as opposed to an estimate?
Yeah,
and
this is Craig. I can respond. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, So I have seen one school do that, and I saw Jana Moore is on there. The University of Missouri System Bookstore has done some of that. I would say that the challenge with that is that we don't typically see a lot of students purchasing from the bookstore. So OpenStax sells our books on both Amazon as well as the college bookstore, and only 10% of students opt to purchase our print, but it's a pretty even mix between buying it on Amazon and buying it through the bookstore. And then, of course, there's the thing that I used to do in college, which was sell my books to my friends, right? So I think there's so many different ways beyond the bookstore. We've got half.com, we've got Amazon.com, Craigslist. I have a Google alert on OpenStax's name, and it's interesting to see how many of our books are sold on Craigslist. So there's so many ways that students are getting around the bookstore to purchase their materials, which is a mixed bag, I think, because if students have some sort of financial aid or scholarship funding and they want to purchase a print version that they can only use at the bookstore, we want them to be able to do that. So I think it's important that those are stocked at the bookstore, but I also think it's important to acknowledge that students are purchasing them a lot of different places. So Craig, I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, and I think that was a great question, and we did look into that as an option because that would have been fantastic. But I think Nicole really hit on some important points. That there were transactions taking place outside of the bookstore, but also in some of the cases, some of the bookstores didn't readily have that data available for us. It was unfortunate and it surprised me, but that was the case.
Well, and I just want to add that, Dale, that study would really be worth doing, and you would want to be able to show, like, this study was able to be done because we had this particular kind of relationship with our bookstore manager that we want to really showcase. And what this study is showing us is information about the cost of textbooks at the campus store. And this is important because that's where students can spend their veterans benefits and financial aid, et cetera, right? But that is getting at the piece of really being clear about what you chose to study and why you made those decisions and what the data is actually showing, right? So that's really, to me, like being really clear about your method and why you made the decisions that you made. Not to say don't do that study, but just, that's what you'll be reporting if you do that study.
That is an excellent point here at the end. This is Jenny. I'm just going to, we are about 3 minutes from finishing here. If anyone does have another question, please use the chat box and we'll try to fit it in. And if any of the presenters want to jump in and make additional comments, please do. I've been furiously taking notes and thinking about this a lot. One of the things that I can add from my work here at MHEC is that we hear a lot that a lot of these efforts could be assisted if there were better ways to track OER usage in student information systems and learning management systems. And so those are some things that we, with our technology committee, are going to be doing a little bit of research on and figuring out what's available out there. Because if you can designate a course as OER, and that can be linked to student outcomes and what's happening there, possibly even eventually linked to bookstore data or some other platform where the student actually does or does not access the OER or any other type of learning material. We are, with time, we're going to have better data and more granular data. So that is an important piece there. But I think it's just important as you think about needing this type of data for your accountability, for grant funding, for your legislature, for whomever you are thinking will be whoever you think will be the audience for the data and your calculations, that transparency and being able to actually measure as closely as possible that which you've been asked to measure is always good data practice. So we knew that this would be an abbreviated look at everything. I know I've learned a tremendous amount. I've got all these little grids and these differences in the assumptions that really make me think. I hope it's been equally helpful to everyone else who logged in today. Please take the assessment that we have. If you want to have if you want to see this where it's logged, I've just put up on the screen where you can find it on the MHEC website. And then this is my contact information if you have additional follow-up. And like I said, we will be emailing you a link for an assessment, and that will tell us what you want to know more about. And we also have some accompanying documents our presenters have prepared. They will also be posted to the MHEC website. So I thank you, everybody, and I hope you have a great day.